The air at forward operating base Razorback tasted of dust and diesel. It coated the tongue, gritted in the teeth, and settled in a fine, ochre film over every surface. For the Marines of 1st Squad, Recon Platoon, it was the flavor of their world. A monotonous, hostile landscape of baked earth and jagged peaks under a bleached white sky. Their new attachment, arriving on the afternoon logistics flight, looked as out of place as a songbird in a vulture's nest. She stood barely 5'7", lean but not frail, with a quiet economy of motion that seemed to absorb the ambient chaos of the FOB rather than reflect it. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot. Her face was a study in neutrality. Her eyes, a deep, unreadable gray, scanned the perimeter fence, the guard towers, the distant mountains, cataloging everything without comment. She carried a standard sea bag and a rifle case, nothing more. Her uniform, a set of Navy NWUs, was clean but faded, the fabric softened from countless cycles of wash and wear. Sergeant Cole Rivas, callsign Wrecker, leaned against a concrete blast barrier, a thick-armed, bull-necked man whose reputation for belligerence was exceeded only by his effectiveness in a firefight. He nudged Corporal Ben Carter with his elbow. "Get a load of that, Navy liaison. Command says she's here for inter-service operational analysis." He practically spat the words. "Looks more like she got lost on her way to the damn library." Carter, younger and eager for Rivas's approval, snickered. "What's she gonna analyze, Sergeant?" "Our MRE menu." Lance Corporal Gene Sato, cleaning his rifle nearby, watched the woman without speaking. He noted the way she stood. Not at attention, not at ease, but perfectly balanced, her weight centered, as if she were rooted to the ground. She wasn't looking at them. She was looking past them, at the heat shimmer rising from the valley floor, her gaze distant and calculating. The woman, Chief Petty Officer Valerie Thorne, walked past them toward the command tent, her boots making soft, deliberate sounds in the gravel. She didn't acknowledge their presence, not out of arrogance, but with a profound indifference that was more insulting than any retort. As she passed, Rivas caught the faint, sterile scent of antiseptic soap, a stark contrast to the sweat and grime that was the permanent cologne of the grunts. "Chief Thorne?" a young lieutenant called from the tent's entrance. "Yes, sir," she replied. Her voice was low even without inflection. "Captain Morales is waiting for you." Rivas watched her disappear inside. "Chief," he muttered to Carter. "Paper pusher." Bet her biggest battle was fighting a jammed printer. The other Marines laughed. The sound harsh and brittle in the dry air. They were a tribe, a brotherhood forged in hardship, and this outsider, this woman from a different service with her clean uniform and quiet posture, was an unwelcome anomaly. They saw a desk jockey, a box ticker sent from on high to justify some budget line. They didn't see the coiled stillness in her frame, or the way her eyes never stopped moving, indexing threats with a placid, almost bored efficiency. They didn't see the predator that wore a human face. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the air was cool and smelled of ozone from the humming servers. Captain Eva Morales stood before a large digital map, her arms crossed. She was a career Marine, sharp-edged and pragmatic, a woman who had fought twice as hard to get half the respect. She turned as Thorne entered, her eyes giving nothing away. "Chief Thorne," Morales said, her tone clipped and professional. "I'm Captain Morales. Welcome to the Suck." "Captain," Thorne acknowledged with a slight nod. "Your file is sparse," Morales continued, picking up a thin folder from the table. "Says you're attached to Naval Special Warfare Development Group 4, technical evaluation, doesn't say what kind of tech. My orders are to observe and report on squad-level reconnaissance tactics in high-altitude, arid environments." "Captain," Thorne stated, her voice a flat monotone. "I'm a data point." Morales's lip curled slightly. She didn't like mysteries, and she didn't like attachments forced on her by some rear-echelon command that didn't understand the realities on the ground. "A data point, right? Well, out here data points get shot at. You're assigned to 1st Squad, Recon Platoon. Sergeant Rivas leads." They're running a simple Overwatch mission tomorrow at 0400. You'll go with them. Understood, Captain. Just so we're clear, Chief, Morales said, stepping closer, her voice dropping. This isn't a training exercise. My Marines are not your science experiment. You will follow Sergeant Rivas's orders without question. You will keep up, and you will stay out of the goddamn way. If you become a liability, I will personally put you on the next bird back to whatever clean, air-conditioned office you came from. Are we clear? Crystal, Captain, Thorne replied, her gray eyes meeting Morales's without a flicker of intimidation. The dismissal was absolute. Morales saw her as a burden, an administrative headache. She waved a hand toward the door. Find Sergeant Rivas. Get your gear squared away. He'll give you the specifics. Thorne found First Squad in their small, cramped barracks, a plywood box filled with the smells of old sweat, gun oil, and stale coffee. Rivas was holding court, leaning back on his cot. Carter and the others were gathered around. The squad's Navy corpsman, a lanky kid named Liam O'Connell, was quietly organizing his medical kit in the corner. Thorne stopped in the doorway. Sergeant Rivas. Rivas looked up, a slow, insolent grin spreading across his face. Well, look what the cat dragged in. It's the analyst. What can we do for you, Chief? Captain Morales assigned me to your squad for tomorrow's patrol. I need the mission details. Rivas grunted and stood up. He was a head taller than her and twice as broad. He walked over, deliberately crowding her space, forcing her to look up at him. It was a classic alpha male power play, designed to intimidate. The details are simple, Chief. We walk. You follow. Don't talk on the radio. Don't touch anything. And for Christ's sake, try not to trip over your own feet. We don't have time to babysit. Carter snorted from his bunk. Might need to tie a rope to her, Sarge. So we don't lose her. Thorne's expression didn't change. She simply waited, her patience a silent rebuke. The air in the room grew thick with their open hostility. She was an intrusion on their sacred space, an unwelcome variable in the lethal mathematics of their lives. We're checking out observation post-Kestrel, Rivas finally said, turning away from her in a gesture of dismissal. It's a peak overlooking the Osher Valley. Supposed to be a ghost town down there, but we've had chatter about insurgents using it as a transit route. We move out at 0400, patrol for 12 hours, then return. Simple, he glanced over his shoulder. Can you handle that? I can, she said. She turned and left. As she walked away, she heard Rivas's voice, low and venomous. Fucking Navy. Send us a real shooter, not some goddamn secretary. Thorne went to the small, empty cot assigned to her. She unzipped her sea bag and began to lay out her equipment with a practiced, methodical calm. Her plate carrier was stripped down, minimalist. Her helmet was a high-cut model, fitted with comms and night vision mounts. She field-stripped her rifle, a standard M4, but one she'd clearly customized, and cleaned every component with a surgeon's precision. She checked her magazines, loading each round by hand, feeling for imperfections. O'Connell, the corpsman, watched her from across the room. He noticed things the others missed. Her medical kit wasn't standard issue. The tourniquets were staged for one-handed application. The chest seals were laid out in a specific, accessible order. The morphine syrettes were taped to the inside of a pouch, easy to grab in the dark. It was the kit of someone who had used it before under duress. He also saw the knife she strapped to her vest, a custom-made blade with a non-reflective finish and a handle wrapped in worn paracord. It wasn't a utility tool. It was a weapon. He walked over, keeping his voice low. Doc O'Connell, he said, extending a hand. She shook it. Her grip was firm, her hand calloused. Thorne, if you need any medical supplies, let me know. I'm carrying the main kit. Appreciate it, she said, her eyes briefly meeting his. In that fleeting glance, O'Connell felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. Her gaze wasn't hostile. It was ancient. It was the look of someone who had seen the bottom of the abyss and found it boring. Later that night, As the others snored or played cards, Thorn sat on her cot, cleaning that knife. The blade was dark, honed to a razor's edge. She worked in silence, the only sound the soft whisper of the whetstone against steel. Rivas, walking past on his way to the latrine, paused and watched her. "You expecting to use that, Chief?" he asked, his voice thick with sarcasm. Thorn didn't look up. She just drew the stone along the blade one last time, testing the edge with her thumb. "Better to have it and not need it," she said, her voice barely a murmur, "than to need it and not have it." He snorted and walked on, shaking his head. To him, it was posturing, a non-combatant trying to look tough. He had no idea he was looking at a master of a violent craft, polishing the tools of her trade before a day's work. He saw a woman. He saw the Navy. He saw a liability. He was blind to the truth. The pre-dawn air was cold enough to make teeth ache. First squad moved out of the wire in single file, shadows detaching themselves from other shadows. The world was a monochrome palette of gray and black, visible only through the green phosphor haze of their night vision goggles. Thorn moved near the rear of the formation, just ahead of O'Connell. Her steps were silent, her rifle held at a low ready, her head on a constant, slow swivel. Rivas set a brutal pace. He was testing her, trying to break her, to force her to fall behind so he could have a legitimate reason to complain to Morales. They climbed out of the FOB's small basin, ascending the rocky scree of the first ridge. The gravel shifted underfoot, making the climb a grueling 2 steps forward, 1 step back ordeal. The air thinned. Lungs burned. Carter was breathing heavily into his radio mic. Even Sato, usually unflappable, was showing signs of strain. Thorn, however, was a ghost. Her breathing was a deep, rhythmic cadence, controlled and even. She moved with a climber's grace, using the terrain, her feet finding purchase where others slipped. She carried the same weight as they did, but it seemed to be a part of her, not a burden she was fighting against. Rivas glanced back, his face a mask of annoyance in the green glow of his NVGs. She was right there, 20 meters behind him, moving as if on a casual hike. He pushed harder. They reached the summit of the first ridge as the sun began to bleed over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. Below them, the Asher Valley lay shrouded in mist, a coiled snake of a canyon carved through the mountains. OP Kestrel was another 2 kilometers away, across a saddle and up a final steep ascent. "Take 5, Rivas grunted into his mic, collapsing behind a rock outcropping. He was sweating heavily, his chest heaving. "Drink water." The Marines slumped to the ground, pulling out canteens. Thorn remained standing, scanning their back trail, then the valley below. She took a small sip of water from her hydration pack, her eyes never still. "Hey, Chief," Carter called out, his voice still ragged. "Enjoying the view? Better take a picture. Probably the most exciting thing you'll do all deployment." Thorn didn't respond. Her focus was absolute. She was watching a flicker of movement deep in the valley, something that didn't belong. A glint of light where there should have been none. Could have been a piece of mica reflecting the sunrise, or it could have been the sun hitting the lens of a scope. "Sarge," she said, her voice calm but cutting through the tired banter. "I've got movement. Valley floor, grid 345 to 981. Single point of light. Possible optic." Rivas pulled up his binoculars, annoyed at being contradicted. He scanned the grid she'd indicated. "I don't see shit, Chief. It's a rock. Relax." It glinted twice. "Same spot," she insisted, her voice still level. "Pattern suggests observation." "Yeah, well, my pattern suggests you're seeing things," Rivas shot back. "We're on a schedule. Let's move." He got to his feet, waving the squad forward. "Suck it up. Let's go." The squad moved on. O'Connell fell into step beside Thorn. "You sure you saw something?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said. There was no doubt in her voice. It was a statement of fact. The feeling of being watched settled over her like a shroud. The valley was too quiet. The air was too still. Every instinct, honed by years of operating in places far worse than this, was screaming that they were walking into a trap. Rivas, blinded by arrogance and his dismissal of her, was leading his men into a kill box. They crossed the saddle and began the final climb to OP Kestrel. The path narrowed, forcing them into a tight file along a sheer cliff face. On their left, a rock wall rose 100 feet. On their right, a steep drop into the valley. It was a perfect channel, a natural funnel. A death trap. "Sarge, this is a bad spot." Sato, the quiet rifleman, finally spoke up, his voice tight with unease. "We're completely exposed here." "Almost there, Sato," Rivas grunted, his eyes fixed on the peak above them. "Just another 200 meters." That's when the world exploded. The first RPG hit the rock face 10 feet ahead of Rivas, showering the path with a hailstorm of razor-sharp stone shrapnel. The concussion wave was a physical blow, staggering the entire squad. A second RPG slammed into the trail behind O'Connell, cutting off their retreat. Before the echoes of the explosions had even faded, the rhythmic, tearing sound of a PKM heavy machine gun opened up from a concealed position on the opposite side of the valley. The air filled with the supersonic crack of bullets passing inches from their heads. Dust and rock chips filled the air, making it impossible to see. "Contact! Contact right!" Rivas screamed, his voice strained with adrenaline and shock. He scrambled for cover behind a pathetic-looking boulder, firing blindly across the valley. "Get down! Find cover!" But there was no cover. They were pinned on a narrow ledge, fish in a barrel. Carter screamed, a high, thin sound of agony. He'd taken a round through the thigh, and the impact had spun him around, slamming him against the rock wall. He slid to the ground, a dark stain spreading rapidly across his trousers. "Man down!" Carter's hit. O'Connell yelled, trying to crawl toward him. Bullets chewed up the ground around him, forcing him back. The PKM had them zeroed. Its fire was methodical, accurate, chewing their meager cover to pieces. Panic began to set in. The squad's cohesion, so solid back at the FOB, was disintegrating under the sheer, overwhelming violence of the ambush. Rivas was trying to direct fire, but his commands were lost in the cacophony of the firefight. They were trapped. They were going to die on this forgotten ledge. Through the chaos, Thorn moved. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't screamed. The moment the first RPG hit, her entire demeanor had shifted. The placid observer was gone, replaced by something cold, sharp, and brutally efficient. While the others scrambled for cover, she had dropped flat, presenting the smallest possible target. Her eyes, narrowed to slits, were already scanning, dissecting the ambush with terrifying speed. She saw it all in an instant. The PKM nest on the opposing ridge, providing the base of fire. 2 riflemen higher up, acting as spotters and pinning them down. The RPG positions, now silent, were likely already relocating. It was a classic L-shaped ambush, perfectly executed. They had been led into it like lambs. "O'Connell!" Her voice was a blade, cutting through Carter's cries and Rivas's frantic shouts. "Smoke! On me! Now!" The corpseman, startled by her tone, reacted on instinct. He pulled a smoke grenade and threw it toward her. Thorn didn't wait for it to land. She was already moving, a low, reptilian crawl toward the wounded corporal. Bullets zipped over her head, but she moved between the bursts, her timing preternatural. The smoke canister popped, spewing a thick cloud of white smoke that momentarily obscured them from the machine gunner. She reached Carter. The wound was bad, a gusher from his femoral artery. He was going into shock, his eyes wide with terror. O'Connell was fumbling with his kit, his hands shaking. "Give me a tourniquet," Thorn commanded. O'Connell handed one over. With swift, brutal efficiency, she cinched it high on Carter's thigh, twisting the windlass until the bleeding slowed to a trickle. Carter screamed again, a raw, guttural sound. Thorn ignored it. "Pressure dressing. Now," she ordered O'Connell, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Pack it deep. Watch for shock. Keep him conscious. She was already moving away, her rifle back in her hands. The smoke was thinning. The PKM opened up again, its tracers a string of angry red hornets. Rivas was still pinned, trying to get a signal on his radio. Jaguar 6, this is Reaper 1. We are in a complex ambush. I repeat, complex ambush. Grid. The radio hissed static. Comms were being jammed. They were completely alone. Thorn crawled over to Rivas, the incoming fire so close she could feel the heat of the rounds passing by. "Sergeant," she said, her voice impossibly calm in the hurricane of noise. "They're boxing us in. The PKM is the primary threat. We don't neutralize it. We all die here." "No shit, Sherlock," Rivas yelled back, his face pale. "What do you suggest we do? Ask them nicely to stop." Thorn didn't rise to the bait. Her focus was absolute. "The gunner is dug in behind that rock formation," she pointed. "He has a clear field of fire on this entire ledge. But he has a blind spot, a washout gully that runs up the side of this cliff. It'll get me to within 50 meters of his flank." Rivas stared at her as if she were insane. "That's suicide. You'll be cut to pieces before you go 10 feet. "Not if you give me a reason to move," Thorn replied, her eyes locking onto his. "You and Sato lay down suppressive fire on the PKM position. Not to kill, just to make him keep his head down. 2 full magazines. Fast cyclic rate. On my mark. It will give me 30 seconds. That's all I need." It wasn't a request. It was a tactical directive, delivered with an authority that stunned Rivas into silence. For a moment he just stared at her. This wasn't the quiet librarian from the FOB. This was a field commander. In the absence of a viable plan, faced with the certainty of death, he did the only thing he could. He nodded. "Sato," Rivas yelled. "On me." Suppressing fire on the MG nest. On the chief's mark. Sato, his face grim, crawled into position, nodding his understanding. Thorn took a deep breath, her body coiling like a spring. She looked at Rivas. "Mark." The world erupted in a new kind of sound as Rivas and Sato opened up, their M4S barking in a furious, sustained roar. Brass casings flew, and the smell of cordite filled the air. Across the valley, chips of rock exploded from the enemy's position as the rounds impacted. The PKM's relentless firing faltered for a moment, the gunner clearly surprised by the volume of concentrated fire. In that instant, Thorn was gone. She didn't run. She flowed over the edge of the ledge and into the gully, a blur of motion. She moved with a speed and silence that was inhuman. Her feet barely seemed to touch the loose gravel. She used every dip and fold in the terrain for cover, her body low to the ground, her rifle held tight against her chest. From his position, Rivas could only watch in stunned disbelief. She covered 50 meters of open, treacherous ground in less than 20 seconds. The 30 seconds she'd asked for was a luxury she didn't even need. The enemy riflemen higher up saw her movement and shifted their fire, but they were too late. She had already vanished into the dead ground at the base of their ridge. Silence descended as Rivas and Sato's magazines ran dry. The PKM, no longer suppressed, opened up again, raking their position with renewed fury. "Did she make it?" O'Connell yelled over the din, his hands slick with Carter's blood. "I don't know," Rivas breathed, his heart pounding in his chest. "God damn it. I don't know." He felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He'd sent her to her death. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. The firefight continued, a brutal, one-sided affair. The Marines were trapped, running low on ammunition, with one man seriously wounded and their communications cut. Despair began to creep in. Then, from across the valley, came a new sound, a single, muffled thump. It was not the crack of a rifle. It was something softer, more intimate. It was followed by 2 more in quick succession. The PKM stopped firing. The abrupt silence was more shocking than the noise had been. One moment the world was tearing itself apart. The next, an eerie quiet fell over the valley, broken only by the wind and Carter's pained groans. Rivas risked a look over his cover. The barrel of the heavy machine gun was still visible, but it was pointed at the sky. Nothing moved. The two riflemen higher up, confused by the sudden silence from their support gunner, began firing sporadically, unsure of what had happened. And then they saw her. Thorn appeared on the ridge, rising like an apparition from behind the MG nest. She moved with a chilling, predatory grace. She took 2 steps to the side and raised her rifle. 2 precise shots, so close together they sounded like one, echoed across the valley. High above, the 2 enemy riflemen crumpled and fell from their perches, tumbling down the rocks like discarded dolls. Silence, total and absolute. Thorn stood there for a long moment, scanning the valley, ensuring there were no more threats. Then she keyed her personal radio, a small device tucked into her vest that was clearly not standard Marine issue. "Reaper 1, this is Watcher," she said, her voice calm, as if she were ordering a coffee. "Ambush broken. 5 enemy Kia. We have 1 friendly WIA. Non-critical for now. Need immediate evac. I am popping smoke on my position." She pulled a green smoke grenade and threw it. A thick plume rose into the sky. Back on the ledge, the 3 conscious Marines could only stare, their mouths agape. Rivas felt a tremor run through his hands. He had seen combat. He had seen skilled operators. But he had never seen anything like that. The speed, the efficiency, the sheer, unadulterated lethality. It wasn't a firefight. It was an execution. She hadn't just flanked the enemy. She had dismantled them piece by piece with the cold precision of a bomb disposal expert. Slowly, cautiously, they got to their feet. The immediate threat was gone. O'Connell was focused on stabilizing Carter. Rivas and Sato simply stood there, looking across the valley at the lone, silent figure standing over the enemy's position. "Who the hell? What the hell is she?" Sato whispered, his voice filled with awe. Rivas didn't have an answer. He slowly lowered his rifle, a profound and unsettling reevaluation of his world taking place in his mind. The woman he had dismissed as a paper pusher, a liability, had just saved their lives in the most brutally competent way imaginable. Thorn made her way back across the valley, her movements just as economical and deliberate as before. As she got closer, Rivas could see the details. There was no blood on her uniform, save for a small smear on her cheek which she wiped away with the back of her glove. Her expression was the same neutral mask as before. There was no triumph, no adrenaline high. There was only a quiet, focused calm. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. She climbed back onto the ledge and immediately went to O'Connell. "Status?" "He's stable," the corpsman replied, his voice shaky. "Tourniquet is holding. He's in shock, but he's conscious. You saved him. You saved us all." Thorn just nodded and checked the tourniquet herself, her movements gentle but firm. "We need to get him out of here before he develops compartment syndrome." Rivas finally found his voice. Came out as a rough croak. "That radio? That wasn't a standard channel." Thorn looked up at him, her gray eyes unreadable. "No, it wasn't." "Who were you talking to?" Rivas pressed, taking a step closer. He noticed it then. Tucked under the flap of a pouch on her plate carrier was a small, worn patch, no bigger than a postage stamp. It was a simple gold trident, set against a black background. He had seen it before in grainy photos and recruitment posters, a symbol of a world far removed from the conventional Marine Corps, a symbol of legends. His blood ran cold. Before he could speak, a new voice crackled over Thorn's radio, loud enough for all of them to hear. The signal was crystal clear, cutting through the local interference like a hot knife. "Watcher, this is Trident Actual. We have your smoke. Hello is inbound. 5 mics out. Be ready for hot extraction. Trident." The word hung in the air. A depth charge dropped into the stunned silence. Rivas's mind reeled. Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DevGru. The unit more commonly known by its former name, SEAL Team 6. O'Connell, who had been wrapping Carter's leg, froze. He looked from the non-standard medical gear she carried, to the patch, to her impossibly calm face. It all clicked into place. The economy of motion, the tactical genius, the chilling lethality. She wasn't a data analyst. She was one of them. She wasn't just a chief petty officer. She was an operator, a goddamn Navy SEAL. Rivas felt the blood drain from his face. Every dismissive comment, every sneer, every arrogant assumption he had made paraded through his mind, each one a fresh wave of shame. He and his men had been mocking a living ghost, a woman who had likely forgotten more about combat than they would ever know. They had wanted to break her nose. She could have broken their entire squad in half without breaking a sweat. Rivas started, but the word died in his throat. Thorne finished her work on Carter's leg and stood up. She looked Rivas directly in the eye. For the first time, her expression softened, just a fraction, losing its hard, combat edge. "I'm Chief Thorne," she said quietly. "And I'm the data point." The whine of helicopter rotors began to echo through the valley. The flight back to FOB Razorback was a study in silence. The bird, a sleek, unmarked Black Hawk, was not a standard Army or Marine transport. The crew, dressed in sterile flight suits with no insignia, operated with a quiet professionalism that mirrored Thorne's own. They had winched Carter up first, then the rest of the squad, and finally Thorne, who had directed the entire extraction from the ground. Rivas sat strapped into a seat, his rifle across his lap. He kept stealing glances at Thorne. She was sitting opposite him, her helmet off, her eyes closed. She wasn't sleeping. He could tell by the controlled stillness of her body. She was processing, decompressing, a mental ritual he couldn't begin to comprehend. The mockery, the insults, the open hostility he had shown her felt like ash in his mouth. He had judged her on her size, her gender, her branch of service. He had measured her by the crude metrics of a grunt, and he had been catastrophically wrong. She operated on a level he hadn't known existed. He had been playing checkers while she was playing three-dimensional chess, and the game was played with human lives. His life, the lives of his men. When they landed back at the FOB, Captain Morales was waiting on the tarmac, her face a storm cloud of anxiety and anger. A different med team was already there, rushing Carter off to the battalion aid station. "Sergeant Rivas, my office, now!" Morales barked, her eyes blazing. "What the hell happened out there? I lost your signal for 2 hours." Rivas stiffened, ready to take the full force of her wrath. But before he could speak, Thorne stepped forward, moving between him and the captain. "The fault was mine, Captain," Thorne said, her voice even. "My threat assessment was incorrect. I misjudged the enemy's capabilities." Morales and Rivas both stared at her, flabbergasted. She was taking the blame. She who had warned them. She who had saved them. "I heard the radio traffic, Chief," Morales said, her tone softening slightly as she took in the state of the squad. "The after-action report from your people was very clear. You neutralized an entrenched ambush and saved 5 Marines. You're being credited with saving the entire squad." Thorne just gave a slight shake of her head. "A better operator would have prevented the ambush in the first place. The mission parameters were flawed. I should have insisted on a different approach vector. I will note it in my report." She was holding herself to a standard that was simply beyond their comprehension. For them, survival was victory. For her, a near disaster that required her intervention was a failure. Morales looked from Thorne's impassive face to Rivas's stunned expression, then to Sato and O'Connell, who were standing nearby, their faces etched with a mixture of exhaustion and awe. The pieces were starting to fall into place for her, too. The sparse file, the strange call sign, the unmarked helicopter. She looked back at Thorne, and for the first time, her gaze held no skepticism. It held a deep, profound, and reluctant respect. "Report to me after you've had a debrief with your command chief," she said, her voice now quiet, formal. It was a dismissal, but this time it was one born of deference. She turned and walked back to the TOC, leaving the squad on the tarmac. The story spread through the FOB like wildfire. It wasn't a detailed account, Grunts don't gossip like that. It was told in fragments, in hushed tones in the mess hall, in silent nods in the gym. First squad went out and got their asses caught in a grinder. The new Navy chief, the quiet woman they'd all laughed at, had single-handedly torn the enemy apart and brought them all home. Details were scarce, but the result was undeniable. The legend of the quiet chief was born. Later that evening, Thorne was in the armory, cleaning her rifle. She worked alone, the rhythmic scrape and click of her tools the only sound in the small metal-walled room. The door opened and Rivas walked in. He stood there for a moment, shifting his weight, clearly uncomfortable. He wasn't a man who was good with words, especially not words of apology. Thorne didn't look up from her work. She continued to meticulously clean the carbon fouling from her rifle's bolt carrier group. Rivas cleared his throat. "Chief." She paused, her hands still. "Sergeant." He took a step forward. I was wrong," he mumbled, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "About you. About everything. What you did out there. I've never seen anything like it." He reached down and picked up a cleaning rod and a patch. "Here. Let me get that for you." It was the ultimate gesture of respect from one infantryman to another. Offering to clean another's weapon was an admission of deference, an act of service. It was his apology, offered in the only language he truly knew. Thorne finally looked up, her gray eyes meeting his. She studied his face for a long moment. She saw the shame there, the humility, the dawning, painful respect. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I've got it, Sergeant," she said, her voice gentle. "But I appreciate the offer." She took the cleaning rod from his hand. Her fingers brushed his, and he felt the hard calluses, the signs of a life spent holding weapons and tools far more demanding than his own. "We're good, Rivas." He just nodded, unable to speak, and backed out of the room, leaving her alone once more. The apology had been offered. It had been accepted. The balance, in its own way, had been restored. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across FOB Razorback. The oppressive heat of the day was beginning to bleed out of the ground, replaced by the creeping chill of the desert night. Valerie Thorne sat on a stack of sandbags at the edge of the perimeter, looking out at the mountains that had tried to kill her and her temporary squad that morning. She had finished cleaning her weapons. Her gear was repacked, every item in its precise place, ready to be used again at a moment's notice. The ritual was complete. It was a way of centering herself, of washing away the blood and the violence, of resetting her mind to a state of calm readiness. She was a weapon, and a weapon must be maintained. A figure approached her in the deepening twilight. It was Sato. He walked up to her, holding a steaming metal canteen cup in his hands. He didn't say a word. He simply set the cup down on the sandbag next to her and stood there for a moment, silhouetted against the dying light. The rich, dark aroma of strong coffee rose from the cup. Thorne looked at the cup, then up at him. He met her gaze and gave a short, sharp nod, a gesture of profound respect from a man of few words. Then he turned and walked away, melting back into the shadows of the base. She picked up the cup. It was hot, the metal warming her hands. She took a sip. It was black, bitter, and strong, just the way she liked it. She held the cup in both hands, letting the warmth seep into her, and continued her watch. The floodlights of the FOB flickered on, casting stark pools of white against the encroaching darkness. The generators hummed their monotonous, life-sustaining song. In the distance, a flare popped, a brief, silent star that illuminated the jagged peaks before dying out. She was a ghost, a visitor in this world of marine grunts, a data point sent to observe. But for one bloody afternoon on a sun-scorched ledge, she had become their guardian angel, their avenging fury. The mockery was gone, replaced by a quiet, fearful reverence. They didn't understand what she was, not really. They only knew that she walked in a darkness they could barely comprehend, and that for some reason, she had chosen to light a path for them to follow home. She finished the coffee, the last of its warmth spreading through her. She set the empty cup down. The night was fully upon them now, vast and indifferent, studded with a billion cold, distant stars. She remained on the perimeter, a silent, solitary figure, her gaze fixed on the horizon. On watch, always on watch.